In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by it. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kid got a kick back and here like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm...
Yo, what's good, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video, and you guys already know the deal. Just look at my thumbnail and everything. We are going to be doing the next part of what Izuku was the son of Ra's al Ghul. Now, in the last part, we basically had 3 bodies in that one chapter. It was first Bakugo, who ended up getting, well, how should I say this in order to not get demonetized? Basically, when it came on to Bakugo, all that was left to Bakugo was a hand. This, of course, was from Cassandra, Izuku, and the big old bat Goliath. Now, for the next people to have ended up moving on to the spirit realm, you could say, it would have ended up being Tsuyu and Mineta, thanks to the USJ. And now we shall get into the next chapter, the next part to this what if. And this part, basically, everyone would still be recovering from the loss of 3 students in what seemed to be just the beginning of the school year. They were wondering how things could have ended up becoming so bad, but they didn't really have that much time besides a couple of days to really end up recovering because of the fact that the sports festival was going to be coming up. Aizawa would have actually informed the students of this sort of occasion. He mentioned that UA still wanted to act like they were strong, that despite the losses that they had, that didn't necessarily mean that they were going to just cancel the sports festival. On tradition, it would make UA look rather weak on their side. Like many other people would begin to think of UA as weaker than it's ever been. Although the students would not see it that way, they would have found it to be much more reasonable, you could say, for them to have actually cancelled the sports festival. But they didn't really have much of a say in this matter. And of course, you guys already know the deal. The kids would argue a little bit, but there wasn't really much to really combat. The other thing that they would end up having to deal with is the whole crowd of students just gathered at their doorway, just trying to seek out the competition. Of course, since Bakugo was not here in this canon to really rile up everybody, the kids wouldn't have just ended up just continue to watch Class 1A. Since they did hear that the kids did fight some villains back at the USJ, although some of them did actually end up dying there. So the students are thinking that there is more of a chance for them to actually get into Class 1A here. And they were thinking along the lines of, hey, there are like 3 spots open for Class 1A that we could actually get at the sports festival. That would be what was on their minds at the time. Until Izuku and Cassandra walked their way through the crowd. Now, some other students would have actually ended up getting some rumors about these pair. These kids, I should not say kids, but more so these teenagers, you could say, were basically built different. One of them took on a large explosion from one of their classmates, although this is a deceased classmate now. They took on a large explosion from them and just casually walked through it. It was unusual to say the very least, because he apparently had a regeneration quirk. This quirk basically seemed to be incredibly strong. Not only strong, but but it seemed to also have some other perks to it as well. It was not simply just a regeneration quake. It seemed to have some bit of enhanced strength to go alongside it. Although with how it was explained by Izuku, it just seemed that the regeneration quirk allowed him to do more than the regular human when it came on to strength, sleep, all of those sort of things. When it came on to Cassandra, she basically had enhanced reflexes, nothing too special, except for the fact that she had a ton of skills. Most other students would actually be kind of intimidated by Izuku and Cassandra. They would actually make a path for the two to walk through in order to make their way out of the class. Not even Shinso would say a word to the two because of the aura that was leaking off of them. And they would just end up sparring with each other and Goliath for the next couple of weeks. Next 2 weeks, I should be more specific. Just training their bodies, getting ready for the sports festival. They already felt like they could beat most of the class, but they weren't sure about the other classes. They didn't really get much information on the other courses as of yet. So they would just be training in order to really prep up and just to be sure to get all of the mysterious parts. How should I say it? Mysterious. Not necessarily mysterious, but more so one of the vague factors in the sports festival beating the other classes, the other courses. They didn't know what these guys really had up their sleeve, so that's why they would be training to really enhance their speed and strength for those next 2 weeks. At the sports festival, Izuku would actually be the one to say the speech here. And this speech would be quite interesting, you could say. In this world, you're not allowed to be weak. The weak fall behind. The weak are the stragglers and they die. But the strong survive. They thrive. I guess we'll all see today who are the strong ones and who were the stragglers. That would be Izuku's speech here. And this would bring chills down everybody's back, everybody's spine. This eerie feeling that they were getting from Izuku, it was just uncomfortable. This guy was on a different level. They could feel it. They knew it. During the obstacle course, it wouldn't be all that hard for Izuku and Cassandra to get to the top places because of their acrobatic abilities and their enhanced bodies as well. Izuku would basically be avoiding as many other robots as possible. Cassandra doing the same as well. Izuku and Cassandra would just be following each other's lead throughout the whole of the obstacle course. They would be able to avoid the robots, hop through the pillars. And when it came onto the minefield, they would just be running so fast that every time they touched a mine, it wouldn't have any effect on them because they would already be up to the next mine already. And every mine would just be blowing up after they had already touched it, but they would be on like the second or third mine by that time. My goodness, I'm getting tired of saying that word. So of course these two would have ended up getting into first and second place. Once they heard that they had ended up winning, they would also be getting the 10 million head points. The 10 million head point band. Well, Izuku would have ended up getting this, while Cassandra, she would have gotten a little less, but something that was still rather big, you could say. Everybody's eyes would be directed towards Izuku and Cassandra, but they would still be kind of worried considering the dark aura that they were emitting most of the time. Izuku would have even released some bloodlust, which made their blood curdle. They would just be kind of scared of Izuku the whole time, and even take a step back from him. They did not want to mess with whatever this guy had going on for himself. Izuku and Cassandra, they would be gathering teammates for this battle, and in this canon they would have ended up walking over to Ida first, offering for him to join their team. Not really offering, but more so telling actually. Ida would have thought about declining at first until Cassandra ended up mentioning this. Decline and I break your legs. Ida would just look at them and realize, yeah, that's probably true. I'll have to decide that you are the absolute best choice here, and I accept your offer. That's basically what Ida would say to them. He would just be too scared to say no. And throughout the whole cavalry battle, nobody would really want to mess with this team. They already had two people who were incredibly scary in many of their eyes, but they also had one of the fastest members of Class 1A on their team, Tenya Ida. So even if they wanted to try and grab the 10 million head point band from them, the 10 million head point band, it wouldn't be quite a monumental feat, really. It would be a monumental difficulty, I should really say. There would be way too much difficulty and time wasted just to get the 10 million head point. Just to get the 10 million point headband. That's what I'm trying to say. It would be too much effort, and they could just end up settling for a second, third, or fourth spot by getting other people's headbands, ones that seem to be weaker than that group over there. Izuku and Cassandra, they wouldn't really be trying to go for anybody here. They would just be sticking to their corner. And in this canon, of course, Shinso would just barely be able to make it here into like 4th place because of the fact that there is still Todoroki's team. He would just be staying far away from Izuku throughout the whole of the cavalry battle. He would just be focusing on grabbing other people's headbands while he used his brainwashing quirk in order to gather his team. By the end of the cavalry battle, the teams that would have actually ended up being selected here are Izuku's team. Izuku's team would have consisted of himself, Cassandra, Ida, and Momo. Momo for the fact that she could actually create things, and they could have actually found some use for her, so she would have actually ended up being part of Izuku's team in this canon. Naturally, these guys would have ended up winning 1st place for the cavalry battle, and 2nd place would be Todoroki's team. Todoroki's team would consist of himself, Zero, Dark Shadow, but Tokoyami, and Kaminari. Kaminari for the fact that he has an electricity quirk. His quirk could have been useful throughout the cavalry battle if it were not for the fact that they didn't have Momo on their team. That was the unfortunate part, and by the time they had ended up selecting Kaminari for the team, it was basically too late for them to make any changes. When it came on to Uraraka's team, it would have consisted of herself, Mina, Mei, and Kirishima actually. The reason for that being because of the fact that, well, Bakugo was dead in this canon, so most of his team would be separated here, sadly. I know many people are kind of like Bakugo, but it's whatever. When it came on to Class 1B, it would basically consist of the one person that's also known as like Shoda. There's Kamori, Bondo, and Pony. You could also call them you could also refer to them by these names. The Explosion Boy, the one who wasn't necessarily dead just yet. There was also the Mushroom Girl, the Glue Man, and Pony everybody already knows. It's literally that one girl from America. She's actually one of the more memorable people of Class 1B. When it came on to the people who would be making it into like the next part of the sports festival, it would have originally been with Shinso being in that bracket as well, until they realized that there was a bit of a tie here. They both realized there was a tie between Ueraka's team and Shinso's team, so they would basically play a game of rock, paper, scissors in order to see who would be making it into the next part of the sports festival. Neither one of them were allowed to use their quirks here. They would have even ended up having some quick disabling handcuffs around them to make sure there was no foul play in this. And Uraraka's team would win. Best 2 out of 3, they would still win. Basically, Shinso would have played rock, and Uraraka would have played paper. And Shinso would have tried to change his tactics and use scissors, but Uraraka would have used rock this time, and that's basically how it went. This is basically just a joke part in order to, well, lighten the mood a bit for the darker elements of this story. Now we can get into the brackets. The first ones to really go up against each other would be Denki Kaminari and, of course, Mei Hatsume. Of course, when it came on to those two, Kaminari would have electrocuted her. It would have been quite easy for him to knock her out of bounds. She really only had her equipment to go off, and once Kaminari electrocuted everything, made those things go bust, it was GG for her. Good game. You will not be missed. I'm joking. When it comes on to Mina versus Ida, of course, Mina would lose to Tenya Ida because of the fact that, well, she's not fast enough to really go up against him. She doesn't have that sort of speed in order to combat Ida, so she would just be pushed right out of bounds before she could really even process what just happened. Cassandra versus Kamori, I won't even bother you with the details. You guys already know who wins, so let's keep on going. Pony versus Momo. Pony wins because of the fact that Momo wasn't necessarily fast enough to actually deflect Pony's horn projectiles. Of course, she would feel kind of weak and pathetic after such a painful loss. This would have actually made it easier for Izuku here. Izuku was already interested in Momo because of her quirk in the beginning. Now she was in a more fragile state. something that he could manipulate to his own benefit. He could be the benefactor here, so he kind of thanked Pony for winning this match against one of his classmates. Tokoyami versus Ochako. Tokoyami can fly. Think about that. Just think about that for a second. So basically, that, and he has quite a reach with Dark Shadow, so it would be rather easy for him to win against Ochako. She would have been disappointed in losing, but at least she still put in some effort. She would have been crying in the back, but her parents would have called saying that they were proud of her considering how far she was able to make it in the beginning. Sure, she may have lost in the end, but she gave it her best, and that's all that really mattered. She made it further than most the other students within UA, so they gave her props for that. For Todoroki's match against Kirishima, you guys already know. Kirishima wins, no difficulty, and that's only in a dream because Todoroki would immediately just ice him. Shoda versus Bando. Glueman loses. I don't care about most of these guys. Yeah, so when it comes down to Class 1B, it would basically be that the Glueman loses to Shoda because they were the ones who actually go on the offensive first. Alright, so now it would be this. The first match of the second round would be Danki versus Ida. Kaminari versus Ida. You guys already know that this is going to be a questionable one. It would depend on who would really strike first. Now, of course, so Kaminari would try and use the indiscriminate shock, which would have immobilized Ida, but at the same time, it would have immobilized himself as well because he would have become a dunce right after. I forgot to mention Izuku's fight with Zero, actually. Zero versus Izuku. You guys already know that Zero would try to wrap Izuku up in his tape, but it would actually end up backfiring on him, which would result in Izuku actually overhead throwing him out to the ring. He would literally just lift Zero using the tape that was meant to immobilize him from a distance, drag him, and then yank him over to the other side of the ring. This would immediately impress the crowd, thinking, how strong is this kid? Anyways, back to the second round. Or in the second brackets, I don't know how to say. Cass and her fight against Pony. She would end up speaking English to Pony, which would actually surprise the girl. There was actually another person who spoke her native language. How fascinating. Her only regret was that this seemed to be one of the scariest members of Class 1A that spoke it. She would speak in the only language that only Pony, herself, All Might, Tetsu, Izuku, and maybe a couple others actually knew. This would greatly surprise them, but with that sort of shock, Cass would use that moment in order to actually catch the girl off guard and immediately throw her off of the ring. Tokoyami versus Todoroki. In this battle, basically, Todoroki would not have the same speech given to him by Izuku. Well, not even much of a speech. When it came on to Tokoyami, he wasn't really interested in having Todoroki use the full extent of his quirk. All he was interested in was winning the competition. And because of the fact that Todoroki refused to use his fire slide, the only thing that was really going to give him an advantage here. Simply put, Tokoyami would end up winning this matchup. When it came on to this though, Endeavor would be severely disappointed in Todoroki. Well, Shoto Todoroki, his son. He would have ended up walking down to meet Shoto and actually talk down to him because of the fact that he refused to use his fire, and that was the reason why he ended up losing here, especially so early on. The last 1B students would basically be plucked off by Izuku. It wouldn't be much of a challenge for Izuku at all. When it came on to Cass, she wouldn't have another match, and Izuku, well, everybody would just continue on. After all the fights, the last one would end up being Izuku versus Cassandra, in where she would actually throw the match. There was literally no way that somebody could legally hijack his healing factor anyways. It would have been pointless to have even bothered fighting Izuku in the first place, considering he would just constantly regenerate. And he had a bunch of stuff going for him as well. Izuku would end up being declared the winner of the sports festival, and everybody would be cheering for him. He would be crowned number one, he would be given a medal, and that's basically how the sports festival would have gone. When it came on to the next time, when they were back in school doing the regular school activities, everybody's attention would have been on Izuku. People would have been interested in him because he literally got first place in all parts of the sports festival. Of course, people would be interested in him. When it came onto all of those hero requests, people were basically voting on Izuku. Izuku probably had the most of, well, requests from heroes in order to intern with them. Todoroki would have the second most. Cassandra would be like third place. When it came on to the hero names in this canon, Cassandra would have ended up going with Orphan here. Izuku would have ended up going with a pretty interesting name here, Fumatetsu. This would be Izuku's hero name in this version of events, rather than simply Deku, when you consider the fact that he never really knew Bakugo in this canon, so there would be no such nickname. On top of that, well, with Bakugo not giving Izuku this nickname in this canon, Obiraka would not have changed the meaning of this name. A lot of things are different in this version of events, even when it comes on to the Stain arc. Speaking of actually, the Stain arc, I should actually mention who the two would be interning under. Izuku and Cassandra would actually choose Ryukyu, considering that she was in the top 10 of heroes, and she had a dragon quirk. They weren't necessarily going to really learn much from her. No, it would be the other way around. But plus, there was really no reason for them to intern under anybody else. As soon as Izuku and Cassandra ended up going to Ryukyu's hero agency, they would have encountered Nijire. Nijire Nijiri would, of course, try and get to know the two. She would have been asking a bunch of questions that they weren't really in the mood for answering at the time. They felt like they needed to get rid of her soon, and really, really soon. But for right now, their attention would be focused on Ryukyu. They would end up having to go on some missions with Nijire. Patrol, you could say. They would be patrolling. They would end up faking some emotions, and you can see that they're a bit too well at doing this sort of stuff. They would be a bit too well, and eventually they would end up actually managing to get Nijire out to the office by herself. She would have actually been not interning, but patrolling by herself at this moment, and they would have found this to be their perfect opportunity to get some brainwashing in, you could say. This brainwashing I will leave to the viewer's interpretation. I'm not going to actually describe how the brainwashing would work. All you need to know is that there would be quite a bit of this, which would eventually have Ryukyu go through a metamorphosis of the sorts. By the third afternoon, she would end up finding what would remain of Ryukyu, or what Ryukyu became. She would have been a shell of her former self. She would have tried to keep up the act that there was nothing wrong with her, but, well, she was pretty broken here. She was mentally broken after all of the brainwashing that she had to go through. All along the same time, they were basically trying to make it act like nothing was happening behind the scenes. Izuku and Cassandra. They would have played their roles extremely well, to the point where Nijire wouldn't have noticed anything wrong at the moment. They would end up going to Hosu. And of course, Stain would be doing something that Stain would be doing. Basically making some of these quote-unquote fake heroes. During the Hosu incident, something else would have been happening. Rather than Stain actually being in that specific alleyway that night, he would have actually been caught by Endeavor right after he had just finished off Manual. Yes, that normal hero with that sort of water quake. But anyways, what ended up happening instead is that another character would be here in this alleyway, and basically getting ready to, well, how should I say it? Basically getting ready to wipe off some of the heroes from this planet. More specifically, one of the heroes being Native. Although I don't know what his quirk is, we'll just say that it has something to do with plant life. And the person that would have been ready to actually annihilate Native would have actually been Red Hood. Ida would have actually ended up dying here as well. He ended up dying in a lot of stories actually. When it came on to Ingenium, yeah, he was able to actually escape Red Hood because of the fact that he saw him as a pretty decent enough hero. At best, he was able to get away just being crippled for the rest of his life, similar to how it was with Stain. Izuku and Cassandra during all of this would end up finding themselves in the alleyway during all of this commotion. They would have actually been looking for Ida after they had heard that he had gone missing as well. They were interested to find out about what happened to this classmate of theirs. What could he possibly be doing? When he actually did make it into the alleyway and saw Jason, they decided that, yeah, this friend of ours, not really a friend, just a classmate, is a lost cause. They weren't really going to do much to really stop Jason. The reason why they even know Jason in the first place is because of his connections to the League of Assassins. Pretty much when it came on to Jason Todd, what ended up happening to him is that when he was basically beaten, bruised, and almost put to death by the Joker, he would have actually crawled out to his grave. Everybody thought that he was dead, but the League of Assassins would have actually found him. They would have found him about 3 years before these canon events. They would have brought him back to their lair and ran some tests on him. They would have had people attack him in several sorts of ways. He would have defended against all of them though. And something that they realized through all of this was that his motor functions, yeah, those were still working. Well, for punching, eating, and sleeping, nothing else really. It's basically like he is just a machine at this point. No feelings or anything. It's just that he is fighting for survival. We're basically going to be combining comic book and movie origins into this. After a year, they would have thrown him into the Lazarus pit after running enough tests on him and really discovering all that he could do. Still, they would have found some use for him. They would have thrown him into the Lazarus pit, well, Talia specifically. Jason would end up going with Talia for what you could say was 2 years. He would have caught up with the Joker and would have ended up making this guy as well. He would have gotten a sweet vengeance on the Prince of Crime. He would have poured gasoline on him and lit him on fire. Afterwards, he would have went around the world, assassinating all of these quote-unquote fake heroes after all that he had been through, and no hero went to save him. This was something that no other person deserved. No one should deserve such a cruel fate, and that's why he figured that it would be good to just get rid of all of these fake heroes, and then get rid of all of these fake heroes that are just using up all of the resources for their own benefit rather than trying to make a difference in the world. That is what Red Hood would be all about in this version of events. Once they would meet up, once Izuku, Cassandra, and Jason would meet up, and they would see each other, Izuku would have even actually told Red Hood to actually just get rid of these two as soon as possible so that we could talk. Ida would have heard this and his eyes would have widened, wondering what the heck was up with his classmate. What did he mean by this? Impossible. There's no way that his friend could possibly be allies with this hero killer. Jason would have just laughed, and although he's not probably on the greatest of terms with them, he was already planning on killing these two, so he just continued on with his work. He wouldn't really hate these two though. He didn't really have much of a relationship to really start with when it came on to these two. All he knew was that Izuku was Ra's al Ghul's son. So he basically had to listen to what this kid said. He was sort of in their debt anyways for the Lazarus Pit incident, for actually bringing his body back, for actually giving him a second chance at life, not just allowing him to be a husk of his former self. Jason would have ended up talking to these two, and they would have actually struck up a deal. After this deal was made, basically what ended up happening was that Jason would have actually joined their team. Jason would have joined the team in an effort to really take over Japan. He figured that this would be interesting, and even if he wasn't really interested in it, he didn't have much of a choice to really begin with. When it came on to Ryukyu, by the end of the 4th day, she would have actually regained her personality. Although when it came on to everything with the torturing and all of that, she's still not the same as she used to be. Even Nejire would have realized this. She would have gotten to know Ryukyu for quite a while after all of the internships she had with the Dragon Lady. So she would have known that there was a bit of a change in how she acted. But she would not decide to comment on it for a little bit. She was probably thinking that this was probably something like a mood swing from just some other causes of the Hosu incident. She knew how strong that Ryukyu could be when it came on to certain crimes. So this sort of crime that happened to a whole city could have probably affected her negatively, but she hoped that she would be able to get through it by the end of the week. Well, that was her plan anyways. That's what her thinking process was. Unfortunately for the girl, she would have actually gotten snatched up in the brainwashing right after. They would have found use for her as well. They wouldn't have found some usefulness in this girl. Crime rate and the death of students. They would have actually begun to grow suspicious of everything that was going on. They would have actually ended up deciding to enroll Billy Batson as their mole of the sorts, their spy. Their spy for UA in order to see if they could get some information on these people. Little did the Justice League know, though, was who was actually behind all of this. They were trying to get everything into their grasp, trying to get as much information as possible. But Izuku would have actually ended up buying out some property to build this Japanese empire's base. This would have slipped through the Justice League's information that they were gathering from Japan. After all, Billy Batson didn't end up joining UA until after, the Hosu incident. Well, more so specifically after the whole interning arc. He would have actually also managed to, Izuku specifically. Izuku would have actually had a credit card from his father that would allow him to actually purchase these sort of things. But to make it less conspicuous, he would have ended up having Ryukyu use some of her money as well. Well, majority, honestly. And the rest would actually be covered up by, some business partners that she apparently got into contact with. So that was the reason why she was buying such a building for the next piece of the Ryukyu agency. or at least that's what many people were assuming. After all, such a hero would require a large agency. They weren't too surprised that she would be buying another building, maybe for more people to actually join, and so that another incident like Hosu would be avoided. After all, more sidekicks are better. So basically, just a recap of this episode, you could say, is that Izuku managed to brainwash both Ryukyu and Nijire. Ida is dead, Native is dead. They also recruited Jason, aka Red Hood, into their team. And when it comes on to the Justice League, they have now grown suspicious of what's happening in Japan. So they decided to send in Billy Batson in order to really try and get a feel out for what's really happening here. Try and figure out what's the reason for all of these recent deaths and why the crime rate is suddenly going up and at an alarming rate as well. So yeah, that's all we really got for right now, Titan Clan. It is your boy King Titan X signing out. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace.